I don't want him to
Got
be
it.
next to me. I want him to go away from me. That seems counterintuitive to a lot of people, but it's like, if you let him go away from you and work him back to you, your connection is going to be much stronger.
Okay, so here's one. This came in this morning. This is from Angie Loftus. Angie's actually a mentoring client, coaching client of mine. And so she says she's looking for tips. She's working with a dog that the owner says leash reactive. What she's observed is that the dog becomes very anxious once she leaves his cul-de-sac. Angie does a lot of dog walking, so she does some like training as well.
Oh,
but
yeah, I saw that
primarily
post.
a dog walker. Yep.
Yeah, I saw that post.
Yeah, so he can't focus. His body language gets stiff. He relaxes once he sees they're going back to the cul-de-sac. So she obviously believes he's lacking some confidence. He was a COVID puppy, and just any sort of tips or guidance you have for dealing with those types of situations. I know it's the kind of thing I've seen before. It's not too uncommon in the life of a dog trainer to see stuff like this.
I think so this is a very insecure dog, to start out with, just based on what's going on. But for me, I'm going to go to the long line in that scenario, if it's possible, if the environment allows for that. The thing I like to do with those insecure dogs is I like them to move away from me. So then I can bring them back to me. So when you allow that dog to kind of venture out away from you, there becomes a disconnect, right? In the information, even though he's on a 15-foot long line. But if he's going to make a choice to move away from me, I actually encourage that, because then through recall, I'm going to bring him back, and I'm going to say, okay, it's like, how do you feel with me? Now I'm going to let you go do your own thing. How do you feel on your own? Okay, recall him back. I'm like, okay, how do you feel here? Right. So you're doing a juxtaposition of, when a dog's away from me, he feels disconnected. There's more anxiety. Right. And then when I recall him back in, and I'm not asking for anything more than just a recall back to me, or even a let's go, just to change his focus back onto me. So you're allowing him to go out into, it would be more of a prey drive, because he's scouting, but it's an uncertainty is what I'm looking at. And so I had a dog years ago that would forage out on the 15-foot line. I was trying to get him to stop pulling on it. Really low pack driven dog. He didn't care a whole lot about me. High prey driven dog, but he was extremely insecure. And one day I took him out and I put him on a 30-foot light line. I just let him have the line. And when he got out to 20 feet, he stopped. No input from me. He just stopped. He turned around and he came back. And this was I was at my ranch, and he walked around the rest of the property with me, not in a heel, but he was with me, right? Anytime on the 15, he knew where his limit was. He could feel pressure on the line. The minute I put him on something light, there was a disconnect with him, and all of a sudden he went, oh, wow. He goes, I'm way out beyond my boundary. So there was that emotional component. You're taking advantage of it. You're saying, yeah, go out there and see how you feel. Now come back here. So once I create that in the dog, and they said, you know what, actually, I do feel better with you here, then I can start asking them, okay, let's stay here. So then you can start working on like your heel command or whatever that is. But if they start forging again, like they can't tolerate it, I'm like, okay, go out again. And so with those insecure dogs, you're taking advantage of that insecurity and saying, do you feel better out there by yourself in this area where he's uncertain? So he's going to spend more time. For me, I'm going to spend more time letting them go out, recalling them in, and just kind of letting them settle with me. I'm not asking for anything more. I'm just saying, how do you feel here now? Right. And if the dog wants to go into flight or go to flight back home, I let him do it, and I bring him back in through a recall. So once they stabilize with me, then I can say, okay, now let me ask you to do this, and I find a lot of times it's a quick process for a lot of dogs, because they're looking for that guidance, and they're looking for that security. And sometimes if you're asking them to stay in a heel and you're having to put a lot of pressure on them, they're not, I see some dogs, they're just not making the connection. Their adrenaline is still too high, or they're in a flight state, but you're putting pressure on them to stay in pack drive. But it's a lot of times the pressure is a lot of pressure. So it's not like compliance through how I would want it to be, where the dog wants to be there with me, So you can create that by letting them go away and then bringing them back into you. And you can kind of create that contrast of how the dog feels away and how the dog feels with you.
I have kind of a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So presumably, of course, like you've done some recall foundation in a comfortable environment. So like in this case, within the cul-de-sac where the dog is more relaxed, you've already taught the dog some recall. And so kind of starting from there, you're getting ready to now for the first time go out and implement this kind of a strategy where you're going to go beyond the cul-de-sac where the dog starts to feel uncertain. Now, are you going to, within that session, like you're leaving the house, you're heading towards the beyond, right? Like the sort of like the
big
unknown
scary
there.
world, right?
Are you going to like maybe start this sort of recall stuff within the cul-de-sac and then just sort of ease your way outside of the cul-de-sac while you're letting the dog go out and recall in? Or are you just like, let's just get out into that beyond space and then start this drill?
That's a good question. It depends. I might start dialing the dog in, you know, with some let's goes and some recalls and just kind of getting them dialed in, and then start moving out into that area. And I'll look for those indicators, like, you know, you're crossing that invisible line where all of a sudden the dog goes, oh crap, and we're going out into this area. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm looking for, the moment where the dog, now I feel really uncertain. It's like, okay, you're on your own. And you can do this on a 6-foot lead. If you can't do it on a 15-foot line, you can just do these short recalls, because it's the same thing. The brain is going in that state and I want to bring it back to me. That's why I'm not asking a whole lot from the dog in that scenario, because I just want him to make, look, here's this and here's this. If you have all these other things like, you know, heel and next to you and things like that, you've trained that in an area where the dog is in a calm state when he's next to you, then eventually, like, I'll start asking him to go into that position as well. Like asking a dog to down on a place and he's calm on the place, and you've been doing that like in the backyard or your whatever, a controlled setting. Then you take him to a park and you start asking him for that same behavior in the park. You know what it's like. It's a completely different context. He's not going to give it to you right away. So you're going to have to like help him through it, whether you're assisting or luring or adding leash pressure. And then the dog goes, oh, I remember that when I'm in this down, my state of mind goes into a calm state. Because place for me is like when you're on place, I need you to go into that relaxed mode. And that's why I teach down on place first, because the place already is established in that context of a calm state of mind. So then when you ask them outside of that, their brain, it takes a couple of reps where their brain finally goes, oh yeah, down I'm normally calm. So then you see the dog sink into it. So I'll ask that of the dog later in that scenario. Yeah, like you said, get him going and get him connected. And then you're going to see that disconnect once you cross that threshold where all of a sudden you stepped off the edge of the world and now he's concerned. I don't want him to be next to me. I want him to go away from me. That seems counterintuitive to a lot of people, but it's like, if you let him go away from you and work him back to you, your connection is going to be much stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like adding that contrast in. Absolutely.
Right.
Which I love that idea of allowing dogs to toggle between sort of different emotional states. And that's something that we use a lot in different ways. I haven't really talked about it in this way before. So it's kind of cool to see that same idea sort of applied in a different conceptual manner.
Yeah. And then you want to go to what's his next strongest behavior. You know, all I'm doing is trying to find how I can make this dog succeed. So if his next strongest behavior is to hold a sit next to me, I'm going to ask him to hold that. And then you'll see me a lot massaging them in their chest, because people say, you give the dogs a lot of affection. I'm just like, no, massage a dog in its chest and watch its eyes and see what it triggers in the dog. Because they just start melting when you massage them here. You're not saying good boy or anything. You're just massaging them. And if he panics, you let him go back out. Guess what he's missing? Now you're making that connection where he's like, man, I'm super calm next to you. You know, so that's what I would kind of start with.